There are places on this earth that continue to challenge everything we think we know about the ancient world. Forgotten cities buried beneath the ground, mysterious monuments built with incredible precision, hidden caves where people lived for thousands of years, underground passages carved into solid rock, and ancient discoveries so remarkable that archaeologists are still trying to understand why they were created in the first place. Every excavation uncovers another piece of a story that was thought to be lost forever. Every forgotten settlement reveals a civilization more complex than anyone expected, and every artifact reminds us that history still holds countless secrets waiting to be discovered. Make sure to subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. And before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, let's begin our journey. Jericho, the first permanent town. For almost all of human history, there were no towns, no villages, no streets lined with homes. People lived lightly on the land, carrying only what they needed. They followed the seasons, hunted wild animals, gathered edible plants, and moved whenever the landscape demanded it. It was a life of constant movement, one generation after another, for tens of thousands of years. Then, something began to change. In a quiet valley near the Jordan River, a freshwater spring flowed year-round. Even during the hottest months, it continued to provide one thing every community needed: water. Around it grew wild barley, wheat, and other edible plants. Herds of gazelle crossed the valley during their seasonal migrations, making the area one of the richest landscapes in the region. People had visited this place for centuries, but eventually, some of them stopped leaving. Today, we know this settlement as Jericho. To modern eyes, it may not look like much. There were no grand temples, no royal palaces, no towering monuments, just a collection of simple mud brick houses standing beside a spring. Yet this small settlement represents one of the greatest turning points in human history. Because Jericho wasn't simply a camp, it became a home. The earliest houses were round in shape. Their walls were built from hand-shaped mud bricks, dried beneath the desert sun. Wooden poles supported roofs woven from branches, reeds, and packed earth. Inside, life was simple. Families slept, cooked, repaired tools, and stored food beneath the same roof. Then they woke up the next morning, in exactly the same place. That may not sound unusual today, but 12,000 years ago, it changed everything. When people stopped moving from place to place, life began to slow down. Heavy grinding stones no longer had to be carried across the landscape. Food could be stored for weeks or even months. Children grew up in the same homes where their parents had once lived. Communities became stronger. Knowledge stayed in one place, and each generation could build upon the work of the last. Jericho slowly grew. New homes appeared beside older ones. When a building became damaged, it wasn't abandoned. It was repaired, or rebuilt directly on top of the previous house. Over hundreds of years, the settlement gradually rose higher as layer after layer of human life accumulated beneath the ground. Archaeologists call these ancient mounds tells. Each layer preserves another chapter of the people who once lived there. Perhaps the most surprising discovery at Jericho stands just beyond the houses, a massive stone tower, nearly 8 meters high, built around 8000 BC. Even today, it commands attention. Thousands of stones were carefully placed to create it. No iron tools, no wheels, no machines, only determination and human hands. Its purpose is still debated. Some researchers believe the tower formed part of an early defensive system. Others think it served a ceremonial role, perhaps connected to the changing seasons or important gatherings within the community. Whatever the answer may be, the tower reveals something remarkable. The people of Jericho could organize large construction projects thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt were imagined. That required planning, leadership, cooperation, and a community willing to work toward a shared goal. Life inside the settlement was changing as well. People still hunted wild animals. They still gathered plants from the surrounding hills, but they were beginning to rely more heavily on the land around them. Wild cereals were harvested with stone sickles. Grain was ground into flour using heavy stone querns. Food was carefully stored for the future instead of being consumed immediately. These were small changes, almost invisible at first. Yet together, they marked the beginning of a completely different relationship between humans and nature. Jericho also reveals something else. The settlement was never completely isolated. Archaeologists have uncovered obsidian brought from volcanic regions hundreds of kilometers away. Marine shells arrived from distant coastlines. These objects remind us that even the world's earliest permanent communities were already connected through networks of trade and exchange. Ideas traveled. Materials traveled. People did too. One of the most fascinating discoveries, however, lay beneath the floors of the houses. When family members died, they were often buried beneath the very homes where they had lived. Generations remained connected to the same place, the same house, the same community. In some cases, their skulls were later removed and carefully preserved, beginning one of the most unusual traditions of the Neolithic world, a story we will explore in the next chapter. By the end of this period, Jericho had become far more than a small village beside a spring. It had become proof that human life was changing, slowly, quietly, but forever. The first permanent towns did not appear with kings. They did not begin with great empires or magnificent temples. They began with ordinary families choosing to stay where they were, to build, to rebuild, and to imagine a future in the same place their children would one day call home. Jericho reminds us that every city on earth, no matter how large, can trace its story back to simple mud brick homes beside a spring in the Jordan Valley. It was here that humanity took one of its first great steps, not across the landscape, but towards civilization itself, vidIQ. Abu Huraira, where farming began. For thousands of years, people harvested food that nature provided. They gathered wild grasses, picked berries, collected nuts, and hunted whatever animals crossed their path. It was a way of life that had sustained humanity for countless generations. But it depended on one thing. Nature had to provide. If the rains failed, or the animals disappeared, people simply moved somewhere else. Then, on the banks of the Euphrates River, a different story began to unfold. Today, this place is known as Abu Huraira. Although little remains visible now, archaeologists believe it preserves one of the most important moments in human history. Because here, people didn't just gather food, they slowly learned how to grow it. The settlement first appeared more than 13,000 years ago. At the time, its people were still hunter-gatherers. Their homes were simple. Small circular huts built partly below ground. Around them stretched open grasslands filled with wild wheat, barley, rye, and countless edible plants. The surrounding landscape offered almost everything they needed. Each season brought something different. In spring, fresh grasses covered the valley. During summer, seeds ripened beneath the sun. Autumn brought nuts and fruits, and throughout the year, herds of gazelle passed nearby. For generations, this rhythm remained unchanged. Then the climate shifted. Around 10,900 BC, temperatures suddenly fell during the period now known as the Younger Dryas. The land became colder, drier, less predictable. Many of the wild plants people depended on became increasingly difficult to find. For communities like Abu Huraira, survival became far more challenging. Leaving was always an option. Their ancestors had done it for thousands of years. But this time, some families stayed. Instead of searching farther for food, they began paying closer attention to the plants growing around them. When wild grains were harvested, not every seed was eaten. Some fell back onto the soil. Others may have been deliberately scattered near the settlement. Year after year, people noticed something. The plants returned. Slowly, almost without realizing it, they began shaping the landscape around them. Archaeologists believe Abu Huraira preserves some of the earliest evidence that humans were beginning to cultivate rye, long before fully developed farming spread across the Near East. The process was gradual. There was no single moment when farming suddenly appeared. No invention changed everything overnight. Instead, thousands of small decisions slowly transformed the relationship between people and nature. The settlement changed with them. Homes became larger, more permanent. Storage pits appeared, allowing grain to be kept through the winter. Grinding stones became increasingly common as cereals formed a larger part of everyday meals. Life was becoming more settled, more organized, and more dependent on the harvest. Excavations have uncovered millions of tiny plant remains preserved beneath the soil. Charred seeds, grains, wood fragments, even microscopic traces of ancient pollen. Together, they allow archaeologists to reconstruct an astonishing picture of daily life from more than 12,000 years ago. They reveal not only what people ate, but how their diets changed over time. Animal bones tell a similar story. Early inhabitants relied heavily on hunting gazelle. Later generations gradually depended more on sheep and goats as animal domestication spread across the region. Both farming and herding evolved side by side, reshaping human society in ways no one could have imagined. Sadly, the ancient settlement itself no longer exists. During the 1970s, construction of the Tabqa Dam flooded much of the surrounding valley beneath the waters of Lake Assad. Archaeologists raced against time to excavate the site before it disappeared forever. Their work preserved thousands of artifacts and countless scientific samples that continue to be studied today. Without those excavations, one of humanity's greatest turning points might have remained hidden forever beneath the water. Abu Huraira reminds us that civilization did not begin with kings, or pyramids, or great cities. It began with ordinary families facing an uncertain world. People who adapted instead of giving up, who learned from the land around them, and who slowly discovered that the future could be planted, one seed at a time. That quiet experiment beside the Euphrates would eventually spread across continents. It would feed growing villages, support rising cities, and lay the foundation for every civilization that followed. Long before history was written, the first farmers were already changing the world. VidIQ, the ancient mine that changed civilization. Long before gold became valuable. Long before people learned to shape bronze or iron. There was another material that mattered more than almost anything else. Flint. It made knives, axes, arrowheads, scrapers. Almost every tool a Neolithic community depended on began with a single piece of carefully shaped stone. Finding good flint could mean the difference between survival and hardship. Which is why, more than 5,000 years ago, people began digging deep beneath the earth in search of it. One of the greatest examples of that effort can still be found in eastern England. Today, it is known as Grimes Graves. At first glance, the landscape seems ordinary. Gentle hills stretch across the countryside, covered with grass and wildflowers. Nothing suggests that an enormous industrial landscape lies hidden beneath the surface. But beneath those fields are hundreds of ancient shafts, each one dug by hand, each one leading deep into the chalk below. Archaeologists have identified more than 400 mining shafts spread across the site. Some descend nearly 13 meters, reaching layers of high-quality black flint hidden beneath the white chalk. Without metal tools, without machinery, and without explosives, Neolithic miners carved their way underground using little more than antler picks made from red deer. It was slow work, difficult work, and often dangerous. Imagine climbing down one of these narrow shafts more than 4,000 years ago. Above you, only a small circle of daylight remains. The air grows cooler. The walls close in. At the bottom, miners work by the light of small fires or simple lamps, carefully striking the chalk until another seam of flint appears. Every piece is valuable. Nothing is wasted. Once removed, the flint is carried back to the surface, where skilled craftspeople shape it into polished axes, blades, and tools. Many of those tools would travel far beyond the mine itself. Archaeologists have traced flint from Grimes Graves to settlements hundreds of kilometers away. This wasn't simply a local quarry. It was part of a growing network of trade connecting communities across prehistoric Britain. The mine helped supply villages whose people may never have seen the place where their tools began. Excavations have uncovered far more than broken stone. Animal bones, antler picks, hammerstones, even the remains of fires lit by the miners themselves. Together, these discoveries offer a rare glimpse into one of the world's earliest mining industries. Perhaps the most surprising discovery came from the shafts themselves. Several contained carefully placed human burials. Others held the remains of animals that appear to have been deposited deliberately. These finds suggest the mines may have held a meaning beyond simple industry. For the people who worked here, digging into the earth may also have carried spiritual significance. The underground world was not merely a source of stone. It may have been a place of ritual as well. Exactly why these offerings were made remains uncertain. No written records survive, only the evidence left behind. By around 2000 BC, activity at Grimes Graves gradually declined. Metal tools were becoming more common. Bronze slowly replaced flint for many everyday tasks. The great mining shafts were abandoned. Over time, they collapsed. Grass covered the ground once more, and the landscape quietly hid its past. For thousands of years, few people realized what lay beneath their feet. Then, archaeologists began excavating the site. As one shaft after another was explored, an extraordinary story emerged, not of kings or warriors, but of ordinary workers. People whose skill, patience, and determination supplied entire communities with the tools they needed to survive. Grimes' graves reminds us that civilization was not built only by rulers or monuments. It was also built by miners, by craftspeople, by people willing to spend their lives underground, extracting the materials that shaped the world above. Every polished axe, every sharp blade, every tool carried across ancient Britain began with a journey into the darkness beneath these quiet English fields. And in many ways, those forgotten mines helped lay the foundations of civilization itself. The star-aligned towers of Hovenweep, on the border between Colorado and Utah, scattered across lonely canyons and windswept mesas, stand the remains of one of North America's most remarkable ancient settlements. At first glance, the towers seem almost out of place. Some stand balanced on enormous boulders. Others rise directly from the edge of steep cliffs. A few appear so carefully positioned that they almost seem to challenge gravity itself. For centuries, they have watched over the desert in complete silence. Today, this place is known as Hovenweep. The name comes from a Ute word meaning deserted valley. It is a fitting description. The people who once lived here disappeared long ago. Only their buildings remain. Most archaeologists believe Hovenweep was built by the ancestral Pueblo people between AD 1200 and 1300. By this time, these communities had already mastered farming in one of the harshest environments in North America. Rain was unpredictable. The summers were hot. The winters could be bitterly cold. Yet families built thriving villages across the high desert. Hovenweep became one of them. Unlike many ancient settlements, it wasn't a single town. Instead, it was a network of small villages spread across several canyons. Each community built its own towers, homes, storage rooms, and ceremonial spaces. Together, they formed a landscape connected by shared traditions rather than defensive walls. The towers remain the site's greatest mystery. Some are perfectly circular. Others are square, D-shaped, or oval. Each was built using carefully shaped sandstone blocks stacked with remarkable precision. Even after more than 700 years, many are still standing. Look closely at the stonework. Every block was placed by hand. No cement, no iron tools, no modern machinery, only patience, experience, and generations of knowledge passed from one builder to the next. Some towers contain narrow windows unlike ordinary doorways. These openings are small, carefully positioned, and often face specific directions. For years, archaeologists believed they simply allowed light into the rooms. Then researchers began studying them more closely. Something unexpected appeared. Several windows align with the sunrise or sunset during the summer and winter solstices. Others point toward the rising moon during important points in its 18-year cycle. A few even appear to frame particular stars visible on the horizon. Were these alignments intentional? Many archaeologists believe they were. For farming communities, the movement of the sun and moon was more than a curiosity. It marked the changing seasons. It told people when to prepare fields, when to harvest crops, and when winter was approaching. Watching the sky was part of survival. The towers may have helped keep that calendar, but astronomy may not have been their only purpose. Some towers overlook nearby springs. Others stand beside large communal buildings known as kivas, where ceremonies and gatherings likely took place. Several occupy commanding positions above the canyon, offering clear views in every direction. This has led researchers to propose many different explanations. Perhaps they served as watchtowers. Perhaps they stored valuable food. Perhaps they marked sacred places. Or perhaps they fulfilled several roles at once. Like many ancient buildings, they may never have had a single purpose. Life at Hovenweep was carefully adapted to the desert. Families built check dams across small streams to slow floodwater after seasonal storms. Stone terraces helped prevent valuable soil from washing away. Fields of corn, beans, and squash were planted wherever enough moisture could be collected. Nothing was wasted. Every drop of rain mattered. Archaeologists have uncovered grinding stones, pottery, woven tools, projectile points, and beautifully crafted ceramics scattered throughout the villages. These discoveries reveal a community that was both skilled and well-connected. Trade linked Hovenweep with distant settlements across the southwest. Ideas traveled, materials traveled, people did too. Then, something changed. By the late 13th century, the villages were abandoned. Homes were left behind. The towers stood empty. The fields fell silent. Exactly why this happened remains uncertain. Many researchers point to a series of severe droughts that affected much of the American Southwest. Without reliable rainfall, farming became increasingly difficult. Others believe growing social tensions, changing trade networks, or shifting populations also played a role. The truth was probably more complicated than any single explanation. Communities rarely disappear because of one event alone. Whatever happened, the people eventually moved on, but they did not vanish. Their descendants still live today among the Pueblo communities of the American Southwest, carrying forward traditions that stretch back centuries. Hovenweep was simply one chapter in a much longer story. For hundreds of years, the towers stood alone beneath the desert sky. Snow fell. Summer storms swept through the canyons. The stars continued following the same paths across the heavens. The builders were gone, but their stone monuments remained. Today, visitors can still walk among these ancient towers. Many stand exactly where they were built more than 7 centuries ago. As evening approaches, shadows stretch across the sandstone walls, and the first stars begin appearing above the mesas. It is easy to understand why generations of people looked upward from this place. The sky feels impossibly vast, almost unchanged from the world the builders once knew. Perhaps that is what makes Hovenweep so remarkable. Not because its towers are the tallest or the oldest, but because they remind us that long before telescopes, long before observatories, people were already studying the heavens, watching the sun, following the moon, measuring the seasons, and leaving behind stone towers that still point toward the sky they once carefully observed. The labyrinth broke of Dún Carloway. On the windswept Isle of Lewis, off the northwest coast of Scotland, a stone tower has stood for nearly 2,000 years. It has survived fierce Atlantic storms, centuries of rain, and countless winters. Empires have risen and fallen. Kingdoms have come and gone, yet the tower still watches over the landscape. Today, it is known as Dún Carloway, one of the best preserved brooks ever built. From a distance, it looks almost like the ruins of a medieval castle. Thick stone walls rise high above the hillside. A narrow doorway leads into the darkness. Small windows break the surface of the tower, but appearances can be misleading. This structure is far older than Scotland's famous castles. Archaeologists believe it was built sometime during the 1st century BC, long before the Romans reached northern Britain. Its builders left behind no written records, no names, no stories, only stone. The first thing visitors notice is the walls. They are astonishingly thick, in some places more than 4 meters wide. At first, that seems unnecessary, until you step inside. Hidden within those walls is something few people expect: a second world. Long passageways wind through the stone. Narrow staircases climb upward. Small chambers disappear into the darkness. The tower is almost hollow, not because it collapsed, but because it was designed that way from the very beginning. It is architecture unlike almost anything else in prehistoric Europe. Imagine arriving here nearly 2,000 years ago. Smoke rises from a fire burning at the center of the tower. Children move between the stone walls while food cooks over glowing embers. Outside, sheep graze across the hills overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Inside, the thick walls protect the people from cold winds that sweep across the islands every winter. The tower is more than a home. It is a refuge, a storehouse, and perhaps a symbol of power. How these brooks were built continues to impress archaeologists. Every stone was carefully selected and placed by hand. No mortar holds the walls together. Instead, the builders relied entirely on balance, weight, and careful engineering. Each layer supports the next. Even after 2 millennia, much of the original structure remains standing. One of the brook's greatest mysteries lies inside its walls. Hidden staircases lead to upper floors that no longer exist. Small galleries circle the interior. Passages connect different parts of the building in ways that almost resemble a maze. Walking through the tower today, It is easy to lose your sense of direction. Every corner reveals another doorway, another staircase, another hidden chamber. It is this remarkable design that has led many people to describe brooks as prehistoric labyrinths. Exactly why they were built this way remains uncertain. Some archaeologists believe the thick walls provided strength while supporting several wooden upper floors. Others suggest the complex interior also reflected the status of the people who lived there. A simple roundhouse would have been far easier to build. A brook required something else: planning, skill, and a community capable of completing an enormous project. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, animal bones, and everyday objects that reveal ordinary life inside the tower. People cooked here, worked here, raised families here. This was not simply a monument. It was a living home. At some point, however, life at Dún Carloway came to an end. The tower was eventually abandoned. The wooden floors disappeared. The roof collapsed. Only the stone shell remained. Centuries passed. Grass covered the surrounding hillside. Generations of travelers looked upon the old tower, wondering who had built it and why. Local traditions later connected the brook to Viking raids and medieval clans. But its true origins reached much further into the past. Today, researchers continue studying brooks across Scotland. More than 500 examples are known, yet no two are exactly alike. Some stand only a few feet high. Others survive almost to their original height. Together, they represent one of the most distinctive forms of architecture ever created in Iron Age Britain. Even now, many questions remain unanswered. Why did people invest so much effort into building these massive towers? Were they homes? Fortresses? Status symbols? Or all three at once? Without written records, the answers remain hidden within the stones themselves. Perhaps that is what makes Dún Carloway so fascinating. Not because it is the tallest brook, or the oldest, but because every hidden passage, every winding staircase, and every carefully balanced stone reminds us that the people of Iron Age Scotland were far more skilled than history once imagined. They built upward. They built to last. And they left behind a stone labyrinth that continues to puzzle archaeologists nearly 2,000 years later. The abandoned Silk Road city of Gaochang. Long before airplanes, long before railways crossed Asia, there was only one way to travel between east and west: the Silk Road. A network of ancient routes stretching thousands of kilometers across deserts, mountains, and endless plains. For merchants, monks, and explorers, it was the road that connected worlds. And in the middle of one of the harshest deserts on Earth, a city rose to welcome them. Today, it is known as Gaochang. Its ruins stand on the edge of the Turpan Basin in western China. Surrounded by barren mountains and endless sand, it seems like an impossible place to build a city. Yet for more than 1,000 years, Gaochang flourished. Its story began more than 2,000 years ago. The location was carefully chosen. Natural underground water channels carried fresh water from the distant mountains into the desert, creating fertile land where crops could grow. Around this small oasis, homes appeared. Then markets. Then walls. Slowly, a settlement became a city. As trade along the Silk Road expanded, Gaochang found itself in the perfect position. Every caravan traveling between China and Central Asia passed nearby. Merchants stopped to rest. Animals were watered. Goods were exchanged. Languages mixed in the crowded streets. Silk from China, glass from Rome, spices from India, precious stones from Afghanistan. Everything eventually found its way through Gaochang. Imagine arriving here during the 7th century. After weeks crossing the scorching Taklamakan Desert, the city's walls finally appear on the horizon. The sight alone brings relief. Beyond the gates, narrow streets fill with travelers from every direction. Chinese officials record shipments arriving from the east. Sogdian merchants bargain over silk and silver. Buddhist monks continue their journey toward India in search of sacred texts. The city never truly sleeps. Every day brings new faces, new languages, new ideas. Gaochang became far more than a trading post. It grew into one of the most important cultural crossroads in Asia. Buddhism flourished here. Temples and monasteries were built throughout the city, attracting scholars from across the ancient world. Many travelers copied religious manuscripts before continuing their journeys, helping spread Buddhist teachings across China. One of the city's most famous visitors was the Chinese monk Xuanzang. During the 7th century, he stopped in Gaochang while traveling to India. The local king welcomed him with great respect and reportedly tried to persuade him to remain in the city permanently. Xuanzang refused. His journey continued. But his writings later described Gaochang as a prosperous kingdom filled with temples, fertile farmland, and thriving communities. Archaeologists have uncovered wide streets, impressive city walls, government buildings, homes, workshops, and the remains of Buddhist temples scattered across the site. The city was carefully planned. Large neighborhoods stood within thick defensive walls built from packed earth. Although time has worn them down, many still rise several meters above the desert floor. Even today, they hint at the city's former importance. Life in Gaochang depended on one remarkable achievement: water. The surrounding desert receives very little rainfall. Without a reliable water supply, the city could never have survived. Ancient engineers developed an extraordinary irrigation system known as the Karez. Underground tunnels carried fresh mountain water across long distances while protecting it from the intense desert heat. These channels supplied homes, farms, orchards, and gardens throughout the oasis. Without them, there would have been no Gaochang. For centuries, the city prospered. Different kingdoms ruled its streets. Chinese dynasties, local rulers, Turkic tribes. Each left its mark on the growing oasis. Trade continued despite changing governments because the Silk Road itself remained the city's greatest source of life. Then, the world around Gaochang began to change. New political powers emerged across Central Asia. Trade routes shifted. Wars interrupted caravan travel. By the 14th century, much of the Silk Road no longer followed the same paths that had once made Gaochang so wealthy. Gradually, the markets became quieter. Fewer caravans arrived. The city slowly emptied. Homes were abandoned. Temples fell silent. The desert reclaimed the streets. For hundreds of years, sand drifted through empty buildings where merchants had once gathered from every corner of Asia. Only the wind remained. Today, visitors walk through broad avenues that once echoed with countless languages. Towering earthen walls still outline the ancient city. The foundations of temples remain visible beneath the desert sun. Standing among the ruins, it is difficult to imagine that one of Asia's busiest crossroads once existed here. Yet every crumbling wall tells part of that forgotten story. Gaochang reminds us that great cities do not always disappear through war or disaster. Sometimes, they simply become unnecessary. Trade moves elsewhere. People follow new opportunities, and places that once connected civilizations quietly fade into history. Perhaps that is what makes Gaochang so remarkable. Not because it was the largest city on the Silk Road, or the richest, but because for more than 1,000 years, people from distant civilizations met here as strangers and left carrying far more than the goods they had brought with them. In the middle of one of the world's harshest deserts, a city became the bridge between East and West, and even in ruin, it still tells that story. The burned grain silos of Teltsaf. Long before banks, long before written contracts, people measured wealth in a very different way. Not in gold, not in silver, but in grain. A full granary meant security. It meant a family could survive a poor harvest. It meant a village could trade with its neighbors. And in many ways, it was the first true form of stored wealth. One of the earliest places to reveal this story lies in the Jordan Valley. Today, archaeologists know it as Tel Tsaf. At first glance, the site seems unremarkable. Low mounds rise gently from the landscape. Scattered fragments of pottery cover the ground. Nothing hints that this quiet place was once one of the most prosperous farming communities of its time. Yet beneath the soil, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary: a series of enormous grain silos. Some of the oldest communal storage buildings ever discovered in the ancient Near East. The settlement flourished around 7,000 years ago, during a period when farming was spreading across the region. By then, people were no longer simply gathering wild plants. Fields of wheat and barley stretched across the fertile valley. Harvests became larger. Communities became more permanent. And for the first time, people began producing more food than they immediately needed. That surplus changed everything. Instead of consuming every harvest, they stored it. The silos at Tel Tsaf were carefully built above the ground using mud bricks. Raised on stone foundations, they helped keep grain dry while protecting it from insects and rodents. Some were large enough to hold several tons of food, far more than a single family could consume. Their size suggests something important. Food was no longer managed only by individual households. entire communities were beginning to organize and protect shared resources. That required trust, planning, and cooperation. Imagine standing in the village during harvest season. Farmers return from the fields carrying baskets filled with barley and wheat. Children help gather the final bundles. Nearby, workers climb wooden ladders, pouring freshly harvested grain into towering storage bins. Each basket represents weeks of hard labor. Each silo represents another year of survival. For the first time, the future could be planned months in advance. Excavations have revealed that Teltsaf was far more than a farming village. Archaeologists uncovered beautifully painted pottery unlike anything previously found from the period. Large obsidian blades arrived from Anatolia, hundreds of kilometers to the north, shells from the Mediterranean Sea, copper objects from distant regions, even beads crafted from exotic materials. These discoveries reveal a community connected to long-distance trade long before the first cities appeared. Perhaps the most surprising discovery came from the grain itself. Many of the silos had been destroyed by fire. The intense heat carbonized thousands of seeds stored inside. At first, this seemed like a tragedy, but for archaeologists, it became an extraordinary stroke of luck. Because the burned grain survived. Instead of rotting away over thousands of years, the fire preserved countless barley and wheat kernels almost exactly as they had been left. These tiny remains allowed researchers to study ancient farming with remarkable detail. They could identify the crops people grew, estimate harvest sizes, and even understand how food was stored more than 7 millennia ago. The fire that destroyed the granaries also protected their story. Why the silos burned remains uncertain. It may have been an accidental fire, a cooking accident carried by the wind, or perhaps the result of conflict. The evidence cannot tell us exactly what happened, only that the flames marked the end of one chapter in the settlement's history. Teltsaf also raises another fascinating question. If some communities could produce such large food surpluses, who controlled them? Did every family own its own grain? Or did village leaders oversee the harvest? Many archaeologists believe sites like Teltsaf offer a glimpse into the earliest forms of social organization. Long before kings ruled cities, communities may already have been managing shared wealth, not in coins, but in food. The settlement continued for centuries before eventually being abandoned. The mud brick buildings slowly collapsed. The silos disappeared beneath layers of earth. Wind and rain erased almost every trace of the village. For thousands of years, no one remembered it had ever existed. Then archaeologists began excavating the site. What they uncovered was more than an ancient farming village. It was evidence of a quiet revolution. The moment when storing food became just as important as growing it, because once people could preserve surplus harvests, everything else became possible. Larger communities, specialized craftsmen, trade, leadership, and eventually, civilization itself. Perhaps that is what makes Teltsaf so remarkable, not because of towering monuments or royal tombs, but because beneath this peaceful corner of the Jordan Valley, the remains of a few burned grain silos preserved one of the earliest chapters in humanity's journey from simple farming villages to the complex societies that would one day reshape the world. The 800-year-old cedar coffins of Kubit el-Hawa. Across the Nile from the ancient city of Aswan, a line of sandstone cliffs rises above the river. From below, they appear almost empty, just weathered rock overlooking the desert. But hidden inside those cliffs are hundreds of ancient tombs. For nearly 4,000 years, they remained silent. Today, this place is known as Kubit el-Hawa. The name means Hill of the Wind. It is one of Egypt's oldest cemeteries for nobles and governors. Unlike the famous pyramids farther north, these tombs belong to the people who governed Egypt's southern frontier, men and women who protected trade routes, welcomed foreign visitors, and controlled one of the kingdom's most important regions. Many hoped their tombs would remain untouched forever. Some almost did. Over the past century, archaeologists have explored chamber after chamber carved deep into the cliffs. Each one revealed another piece of ancient Egyptian life: painted walls, wooden statues, pottery, jewelry, and carefully prepared burials. Then, one discovery stood out from all the others. Inside several tombs rested beautifully crafted cedar wood coffins dating back nearly 3,800 years. Even after thousands of years, many remained remarkably well preserved. That alone was surprising, because cedar does not naturally grow in Egypt. Every plank had traveled hundreds of kilometers from the forests of ancient Lebanon. Imagine what that journey required. Trees were cut high in the mountains, transported to the Mediterranean coast, loaded onto ships, sailed south, then carried up the Nile before finally reaching Aswan. It was an expensive material, one reserved for people of great importance. The coffins themselves were carefully made. Smooth wooden boards fitted together with remarkable precision. Some still preserved traces of painted decoration. Others carried inscriptions asking the gods to protect the person resting inside. To the ancient Egyptians, a coffin was far more than a container. It was part of the journey into the afterlife. They believed death was not an ending. It was a passage, a new beginning. Everything placed inside the tomb had a purpose: food, pottery, jewelry, walking sticks, even small wooden models showing servants at work. The dead would need these things again, or so they believed. One burial attracted particular attention. Archaeologists uncovered the coffin of a powerful local governor whose tomb had remained largely undisturbed. Alongside the coffin were carefully arranged grave goods, personal belongings, and beautifully carved objects that offered a rare glimpse into life during Egypt's Middle Kingdom. Rather than focusing only on pharaohs, these discoveries revealed the lives of the officials who kept the kingdom functioning every day. The cliffs of Kubet el-Hawa also tell another story. For centuries, Egypt's southern border was one of the busiest crossroads in Africa. Caravans arrived from Nubia carrying gold, ivory, ebony, incense, and exotic animals. Boats moved constantly along the Nile. Governors based at Aswan managed this trade, negotiated with neighboring kingdoms, and reported directly to the royal court. Many of them were eventually buried here, looking out across the river they had once ruled. Excavations continue to reveal remarkable details: fragments of clothing, wooden furniture, children's burials, even traces of ancient diseases preserved within the skeletons. Every discovery helps archaeologists understand not only how these people died, but how they lived. One reason the tombs survived so well is the desert itself. The dry Egyptian climate slowed decay for thousands of years. Organic materials that would have disappeared elsewhere remained intact beneath the sand. Wood, textiles, leather, even delicate plant fibers. It is one of the reasons Egypt continues to preserve so much of its ancient past. Yet not every tomb escaped untouched. Over the centuries, many were entered by robbers searching for valuables. Some coffins were damaged, others were emptied completely. Even so, enough survived to reveal an extraordinary picture of life nearly 4 millennia ago. Today, archaeologists still climb the steep paths leading to Kubet el-Hawa. Each excavation uncovers another forgotten chamber, another coffin, another family whose story has remained hidden for thousands of years. The work is far from over. New discoveries continue to emerge from the cliffs almost every excavation season. Perhaps that is what makes Kubet el-Hawa so fascinating. Not because it belonged to kings, or because it held unimaginable treasure, but because these quiet tombs preserve the lives of ordinary officials, governors, and families who helped shape one of history's greatest civilizations. Their cedar coffins crossed mountains and seas. Their names were carved into stone. And after nearly 3,800 years, their stories are finally being told once again. The underground city of Nushabad. Beneath the streets of a quiet town in central Iran, another city lies hidden. There are no rooftops, no marketplaces, no sunlight, only narrow tunnels carved through solid earth. Small chambers disappear into the darkness. Passageways twist in unexpected directions. Staircases descend deeper and deeper underground. For centuries, most people had no idea it existed. Today, this remarkable place is known as Nushabad, one of the largest underground cities ever discovered in the Middle East. According to local tradition, the city above was founded during the Sasanian Empire more than 1,500 years ago. But the underground world beneath it continued to grow for centuries. Generation after generation carved new tunnels, new rooms, new escape routes, until an entire hidden settlement stretched beneath the town. The discovery itself came by accident. In 2005, a resident was digging inside his home when the ground suddenly gave way. Instead of ordinary soil, he found an ancient tunnel. Archaeologists were called to investigate. As they explored farther, they realized this was no isolated chamber. It was an enormous underground network. Some passages reached nearly 18 meters below the surface. Others connected to homes through hidden entrances that had remained sealed for centuries. Imagine living here more than 1,000 years ago. Life above ground appears peaceful. Merchants fill the streets. Children play outside. Farmers return from the fields. Then, news arrives that an invading army is approaching. Everything changes. Families disappear inside their homes. A stone slab is lifted. A hidden staircase appears beneath the floor. One by one, people climb into the darkness. The entrance is sealed behind them. Within minutes, an entire neighborhood has vanished. Below the surface, the underground city comes alive. Oil lamps flicker against the walls. Children whisper quietly. Food and water are carefully shared. Families wait in silence while danger passes overhead. It was an extraordinary solution to an extraordinary problem. Unlike castles or city walls, Nushabad was never meant to be seen. Its greatest strength was secrecy. The tunnels were deliberately designed to confuse strangers. Many passageways are so narrow that only one person can pass at a time. Sharp turns make it almost impossible to see what lies ahead. Some corridors suddenly split into several directions. Others end without warning. Archaeologists believe these features were designed to slow intruders unfamiliar with the underground maze. The city was also surprisingly practical. Small ventilation shafts brought fresh air deep underground. Storage rooms held food and drinking water. Living spaces allowed entire families to remain hidden for extended periods. Even after hours beneath the surface, fresh air could still circulate through much of the complex. The builders understood their environment remarkably well. Every chamber was carved directly into compact clay and sediment. No bricks, no stone blocks. The earth itself became the walls. Over time, these underground spaces remained stable, protected from the intense desert heat above. While summer temperatures outside could become unbearable, the tunnels stayed cool throughout the year. Nushabad was not unique in using underground shelters. Similar refuges existed elsewhere in the ancient world, but few matched its size or complexity. Researchers estimate the underground city extends beneath large sections of the modern town. Much of it still remains unexplored. Some passages may never have been rediscovered. Exactly how many people could shelter here remains uncertain, but archaeologists believe hundreds, and perhaps even thousands, may have used the network during periods of conflict. The underground city was not built all at once. Different generations expanded it as new dangers appeared. Each period added new chambers, new tunnels, and new entrances. It became a living project, growing alongside the town above. For centuries, the hidden city served its purpose. Then, the threats gradually disappeared. The tunnels were abandoned. Entrances were sealed. Knowledge of the underground passages slowly faded from memory. Eventually, people forgot they had ever existed. Homes were built above them. Children played in streets without realizing another world rested beneath their feet. Only by chance was the city found again. Today, visitors can descend into parts of the underground maze. The ceilings remain low. The corridors remain narrow. The silence is almost complete. Walking through the tunnels, it is easy to imagine the fear felt by families waiting below while armies marched above their heads. Perhaps that is what makes Nushabad so remarkable, not because it was hidden or because it survived for centuries, but because it reminds us that some of history's greatest cities were never built to be admired. They were built to disappear, to protect ordinary people when the world above became too dangerous. And for hundreds of years, that hidden city beneath the desert did exactly that. The forgotten settlement of Vlasak. Long before Europe's first kingdoms, long before farming spread across the continent, people were already building communities along the banks of the Danube River. They hunted, they fished, they buried their dead, and they returned to the same place generation after generation. One of those places was Vlasak, hidden within the dramatic Iron Gates gorge of modern-day Serbia. At first glance, it doesn't seem like the kind of place that would change history. There are no towering walls, no temples, no great monuments rising above the landscape, only a quiet riverside overlooking one of Europe's most powerful waterways. Yet beneath the ground, archaeologists uncovered one of the oldest permanent settlements ever found in southeastern Europe. The story of Vlasak began nearly 9,000 years ago. At a time when much of Europe was still covered by dense forests, The Danube offered something few places could: an endless source of life. Fish filled the river. Game wandered through the surrounding hills. Fresh water was always close by. For hunter-gatherers, it was the perfect place to settle. Unlike many communities of the time, the people of Vlasak didn't simply pass through. They stayed, season after season, year after year. Their homes were built close to the riverbank, where daily life revolved around the changing waters of the Danube. Excavations have uncovered stone fireplaces, working areas, tools made from bone and antler, and countless fishing hooks carved with remarkable skill. Fishing was not just an occasional activity, it was the foundation of life. Huge sturgeon once swam through these waters, some growing longer than a person. Catching one required patience, experience, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The river fed the settlement, but it also shaped its beliefs. One of the most remarkable discoveries at Vlasak came from its cemetery. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of carefully arranged burials, many placed only a short distance from the homes where people had lived. Some individuals were laid to rest on their backs. Others rested in crouched positions. Several were buried with tools or personal belongings beside them. These burials reveal something important. The people of Vlasak were deeply connected to this place. They did not simply live here. They expected future generations to remain here as well. In many ways, the settlement had become more than a campsite. It had become a homeland. Researchers also noticed something unusual about the community. The people of Vlasak lived during a time of enormous change. Across nearby regions, farming was beginning to spread into Europe from the Near East. New ideas, new animals, new crops slowly moved westward. For a time, hunter-gatherers and early farmers lived side by side. Vlasak preserves evidence of this remarkable transition. Some generations continued relying almost entirely on fishing and hunting. Later inhabitants gradually adopted domesticated plants and animals brought by neighboring farming communities. It wasn't an overnight revolution. It was a slow blending of two different ways of life. That makes Vlasak one of the best places in Europe for understanding how farming spread across the continent, not through conquest alone, but through generations of contact, trade, and shared knowledge. Archaeologists have also uncovered beautifully crafted ornaments made from shells, animal teeth, and polished stone. Many of these materials came from distant places. Even this early riverside community was connected to wider networks stretching far beyond the Danube Valley. Ideas traveled, people traveled, and sometimes, so did traditions. For centuries, Vlasak remained an important settlement. Then life slowly shifted elsewhere. The houses disappeared. The fireplaces grew cold. The river continued flowing exactly as it always had. Eventually, the settlement was forgotten. For thousands of years, layers of earth quietly protected its remains. Then, during the 20th century, archaeologists began excavating the site before major engineering projects transformed parts of the Danube Gorge forever. Their discoveries revealed far more than an ancient village. They uncovered a community standing at one of the greatest turning points in human history, a place where the old world of hunter-gatherers slowly met the new world of farming. Perhaps that is what makes Vlasak so remarkable. Not because it was the largest settlement, or the richest, but because it preserves a rare moment when two different worlds briefly existed together. One looking back toward humanity's oldest traditions, the other quietly stepping into the future. Along the banks of the Danube, that future had already begun. The city of Cahokia Mounds, for centuries, the largest city north of Mexico, wasn't New York. It wasn't Boston or Philadelphia. Those cities didn't exist yet. Instead, the greatest urban center in North America stood beside the Mississippi River, a city filled with towering earthen mounds, busy marketplaces, and thousands of people. Today, it is known as Cahokia. Its remains lie near present-day Illinois. At first glance, the landscape looks peaceful. Wide grassy fields stretch toward the horizon. A handful of large mounds rise gently above the surrounding plain. It almost feels like a natural landscape. But none of these hills are natural. Every mound was built by human hands, basket by basket, layer by layer, over generations. Around AD 1050, Cahokia began to grow at an astonishing pace. Families arrived from surrounding regions. New neighborhoods appeared almost overnight. Wooden homes spread across the floodplain. Roads connected different parts of the settlement. Before long, Cahokia had become something North America had rarely seen before, a true city. At its height, archaeologists believe between 10,000 and 20,000 people lived here. Some estimates suggest the population may have been even larger. For several centuries, it rivaled many of Europe's medieval cities. At the center of Cahokia stood its greatest monument, Monk's Mound. Even today, it dominates the landscape. Rising nearly 30 meters above the plain, it remains the largest prehistoric earthen structure in North America. Building it required an extraordinary effort. Millions of baskets filled with soil were carried by hand. No horses, no oxen, no wheeled carts. Only thousands of people working together. At the summit stood a massive wooden building, perhaps the home of an important leader, perhaps a ceremonial structure. No one knows for certain. But from its highest point, the entire city could be seen stretching across the valley. Life below was constantly changing. Farmers harvested vast fields of maize. Hunters brought deer and wild turkey into the markets. Craftspeople shaped stone tools, carved ornaments from shell, and produced finely made pottery. The city buzzed with activity. People from distant communities arrived carrying goods for trade. Ideas spread just as quickly as objects. Cahokia became more than a settlement. It became the heart of a growing civilization. One of the city's most fascinating discoveries stood a short distance from the central mound. Archaeologists uncovered a circle made from massive wooden posts. Today, it is often called Woodhenge. The name is modern, but its purpose may have been ancient astronomy. As the sun rose on the summer and winter solstices, its light aligned with specific posts. The builders were carefully watching the sky, not simply out of curiosity, but to measure the changing seasons. Knowing when to plant and harvest could determine whether an entire community survived. The heavens became part of everyday life. Excavations have revealed evidence of large public gatherings, ceremonial feasts, and complex religious traditions. Special buildings stood apart from ordinary homes. Some areas appear to have been reserved for rituals that brought communities together. Cahokia was more than a political center. It was also a spiritual one. Its influence stretched far beyond the city itself. Artifacts made from Gulf Coast shells have been found here. Copper arrived from the Great Lakes. Stone traveled from distant quarries hundreds of kilometers away. These discoveries reveal an enormous trade network connecting much of eastern North America. Long before European ships crossed the Atlantic, goods and ideas were already moving across the continent. Then, something changed. Around the 13th century, the city began to decline. Neighborhoods were abandoned. Construction slowed. The population gradually fell. Within a few generations, much of Cahokia stood empty. Exactly why remains one of North America's greatest archaeological questions. Some researchers point to repeated flooding from the Mississippi River. Others believe prolonged drought damaged agriculture, political unrest, resource shortages, disease, or changing trade routes may also have played a role. The truth was likely far more complex than a single explanation. By the time European explorers reached the region centuries later, the great city had already disappeared. Its wooden buildings had long since decayed. Only the earthen mounds remained, covered in grass, standing quietly above the landscape. Today, archaeologists continue uncovering new pieces of Cahokia's story. Every excavation reveals another neighborhood, another workshop, another clue about the people who built one of North America's greatest cities. Perhaps that is what makes Cahokia so remarkable, not because it left behind stone temples or marble palaces, but because it reminds us that remarkable civilizations can rise anywhere, even on the rich floodplains of the Mississippi River. Long before modern America existed, a thriving city already stood here, built from earth, connected by trade, guided by the stars, and remembered today only through the silent mounds that still rise above the Illinois landscape. The Sutton Hoo Helmet Burial. In the summer of 1939, a quiet field in eastern England changed history forever. For generations, a series of grassy mounds had overlooked the River Deben. Most people believed they were simply ancient burial hills, nothing more. But beneath one of those mounds, an extraordinary secret had been waiting for nearly 14 centuries. Today, the site is known as Sutton Hoo. It is one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made in Britain. At first, archaeologists uncovered the outline of something unexpected. Not a tomb, not a stone chamber, but the ghostly imprint of a wooden ship. The timber had long since rotted away. Only stains in the sandy soil marked where the planks had once rested. Even so, the shape was unmistakable. The vessel measured nearly 27 meters in length. It had been carefully pulled ashore, placed inside a large trench, and covered beneath an enormous mound of earth. Whoever rested here was someone of immense importance. At the center of the ship lay a burial chamber. Although grave robbers had disturbed parts of the site centuries earlier, much of its treasure remained untouched. Archaeologists uncovered gold buckles, silver bowls, decorated weapons, fine jewelry, coins from distant kingdoms, and objects crafted by some of the finest metalworkers of the early medieval world. Then, piece by piece, one of the most famous artifacts in British history began to appear: a helmet. At first, it looked like little more than hundreds of rusted fragments scattered across the ground. The iron had almost completely decayed. Years of careful conservation were needed before experts realized what they had found. Slowly, the broken pieces came together. A face emerged, eyebrows shaped like a soaring bird, a fierce nose guard, cheek plates, and a full iron mask unlike anything discovered in England before. Today, the Sutton Hoo helmet has become an icon of the Anglo-Saxon world. It is both beautiful and intimidating, built for protection, but also for display. Its intricate decorations suggest it belonged to someone whose authority extended far beyond the battlefield. Many historians believe the burial may belong to King Radwald of East Anglia, who ruled during the early 7th century. No inscription confirms his name. No written record identifies the owner, but the wealth of the burial, its date, and its royal location make him one of the strongest candidates. Even if the identity remains uncertain, there is little doubt that the person buried here stood among the most powerful figures in early England. The treasures reveal a world far more connected than many once imagined. Silver arrived from the eastern Mediterranean. Coins came from the Frankish kingdoms of Europe. Luxury goods traveled across seas and rivers before reaching East Anglia. Far from being isolated, Anglo-Saxon England was already part of a vast international network of trade and diplomacy. The helmet itself tells an equally remarkable story. Its design shares similarities with helmets discovered in Sweden, suggesting close cultural connections across the North Sea. Ideas traveled, craftsmanship traveled, and perhaps warriors did too. Every engraved panel tells a story. Battles between warriors, powerful animals, symbols of strength and protection. The helmet was never simply a piece of armor. It was a statement, a symbol of leadership, a reminder that the person wearing it held both military and political authority. Then, for reasons we may never fully understand, the ship was buried, not launched into the sea, not abandoned, but carefully covered beneath thousands of tons of earth. The burial itself became a monument, a final tribute visible across the surrounding countryside. Over time, the wooden ship disappeared. The chamber collapsed. Grass slowly covered the mound. Centuries passed. Kingdoms rose and fell. The Norman conquest reshaped England. Castles replaced royal halls. And the memory of the great ship burial faded completely, until 1939, when archaeologists uncovered one of Britain's greatest lost treasures. Today, the Sutton Hoo helmet is displayed in a museum, carefully reconstructed from hundreds of fragments. It has become one of the defining symbols of early medieval Europe. Yet the burial still raises many questions. Who truly rested beneath the mound? Why was a ship chosen as a tomb? How many other royal burials remain hidden beneath the English countryside? Those answers remain buried in the past. Perhaps that is what makes Sutton Hoo so unforgettable. Not because of its gold or its silver, but because beneath one quiet hill, archaeologists uncovered the memory of a forgotten king, a magnificent ship, and a helmet that still stares back across 14 centuries of history, reminding us that some of the greatest kingdoms leave behind only whispers beneath the earth. The painted tombs of Tarquinia. Beneath the rolling hills of central Italy, an entire city lies hidden underground. There are no crowded streets, no marketplaces, no voices, only hundreds of chambers carved into soft rock, each one sealed for more than 2,000 years. Together, they form one of the greatest ancient cemeteries ever discovered. This is Tarquinia, the resting place of the mysterious Etruscans. Long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, the Etruscans were among the most powerful people in Italy. They built prosperous cities, traded across the sea, worked bronze, gold, and iron with remarkable skill, and influenced many traditions that the Romans would later adopt. Yet despite their importance, much of their history has disappeared. Their language is only partly understood. Most of their cities were rebuilt by later civilizations. But beneath the ground, their world survived. For centuries, the tombs remained untouched. When archaeologists finally entered them, they expected to find little more than stone chambers. Instead, they stepped into rooms filled with color, walls covered in paintings, bright reds, deep blues, soft yellows, scenes of music, dancing, hunting, feasting, and everyday life still decorated the stone after more than 2,000 years. It was unlike anything anyone had expected. These weren't dark places meant to celebrate death. They were filled with life. One tomb shows musicians playing flutes while dancers move across the floor. Another captures athletes competing in games. Elsewhere, families gather around long banquet tables, raising cups in celebration. Even animals fill the walls. Birds fly overhead. Fish swim beneath the waves. Trees bend gently in the breeze. Every painting tells part of a story. The Etruscans believed death was not simply an ending. It was another journey. Many tombs were designed to resemble the homes people had lived in during life. Stone benches looked like beds. Ceilings were carved to imitate wooden roofs. Some chambers even contained furniture carved directly into the rock. The dead were expected to continue their existence in another world. Their tomb became their new home. Excavations have uncovered beautifully painted pottery, bronze mirrors, jewelry, weapons, and finely crafted objects placed beside the deceased. Every item had meaning. Every object reflected the life of the person buried there. Some belonged to wealthy nobles, others to respected families whose names have long been forgotten. Among the most famous is the Tomb of the Leopards. Its name comes from two spotted leopards painted above a lively banquet scene. Below them, men and women recline together, enjoying food, music, and conversation. The artwork feels surprisingly familiar, not because it depicts kings or battles, but because it captures ordinary moments of celebration. It reminds us that even across thousands of years, people found joy in gathering with family and friends. The paintings also reveal something rare. Unlike many ancient civilizations, Etruscan women often appear beside men at banquets and ceremonies. Greek writers even commented on this unusual custom. Although some accounts were exaggerated, the artwork suggests that women held a more visible role in Etruscan society than in many neighboring cultures. For archaeologists, the tombs are more than works of art. They are historical records. The Etruscans left relatively few written documents, so the paintings became their history books. Their clothing, their music, their games, their beliefs. Even the plants and animals they knew can still be seen upon these ancient walls. Then, the Etruscan world began to change. As Rome expanded across Italy, one city after another came under Roman control. Their language slowly disappeared. Their political power faded. Eventually, the civilization itself was absorbed into the growing Roman Republic. But beneath the hills of Tarquinia, their memories remained untouched. For over 2 millennia, the painted chambers waited in silence, protected by earth, hidden from sunlight, waiting for someone to open their doors once again. Today, visitors can still descend into many of these remarkable tombs. The colors remain astonishingly vivid. The musicians still play. The dancers still move. The banquets never seem to end. Perhaps that is what makes Tarquinia so unforgettable. Not because it preserves great temples or royal palaces, but because it preserves something even rarer, a glimpse into everyday life, a civilization that refused to let death erase its memories. And beneath the quiet hills of Italy, those memories continue to survive, painted across stone just as vividly as the day they were first created. The rock sanctuary of Somatar, across the dry plains of southeastern Turkey, a lonely hill rises above the surrounding landscape. At first glance, it seems little different from the rocky hills around it. A few scattered ruins, weathered stone, and silence. But hidden among those rocks is one of the ancient world's most mysterious sanctuaries, a place where people once gathered beneath the open sky to worship the heavens. Today, it is known as Somatar. For centuries, This remote settlement stood at the crossroads of civilizations. Romans passed through the region. Earlier kingdoms settled nearby. Trade routes connected Mesopotamia with Anatolia. Yet Somatar remained something different. Not a great city, not a military fortress, but a sacred place. The heart of the sanctuary lies at the foot of a rocky hill. Here, ancient builders carved shrines directly into the stone. Small chambers open beneath towering cliffs. Steps cut into the rock lead toward places of worship that have survived for nearly 2,000 years. Unlike the grand temples of Egypt or Greece, much of Somatar was shaped by the landscape itself. The mountain became the temple. The cliffs became its walls. Perhaps the most remarkable feature is the hill overlooking the sanctuary. Its summit contains a series of carved platforms and altars. From here, the surrounding plains stretch for kilometers in every direction. It is easy to understand why ancient people believed this was a sacred place. The sky feels impossibly close, especially after sunset. Somatar became closely associated with the worship of the moon god Sin, one of the oldest deities of ancient Mesopotamia. Long before telescopes, the moon governed the rhythm of life. It marked the passing of months, guided travelers during the night, and helped farmers measure the seasons. For many ancient cultures, watching the heavens was not simply science. It was religion. Stone inscriptions found throughout the sanctuary mention priests, religious leaders, and people who dedicated monuments to their gods. Many are written in Syriac, preserving the names of individuals who lived here nearly 18 centuries ago. Unlike many ancient sites, the voices of its visitors have not disappeared completely. Some are still carved into the rock. Excavations have also uncovered tombs surrounding the sanctuary. Many were carved directly into the hillside. Others were built beneath the earth. Their presence suggests that people wished to remain close to this sacred place even after death. To them, the hill was more than a landmark. It was a bridge between the earthly world and the heavens above. Walking through Somatar today, one detail becomes impossible to ignore. Almost everything was carved by hand. Doorways, altars, steps, small niches cut into the cliffs. Every surface bears the marks of ancient tools. No marble columns, no polished palaces, just stone carefully shaped over generations. Archaeologists believe the sanctuary flourished during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, when the region stood between the Roman Empire and the kingdoms of Mesopotamia. Merchants, pilgrims, and travelers likely visited the site from many different lands. Some came to pray, others to leave offerings. Some may simply have sought guidance beneath the same stars that watched over every journey. As new religions spread across the region, the old sanctuary gradually fell silent. Its priests disappeared. Its ceremonies ended. The carved altars remained. But the voices that once echoed across the hill slowly faded into history. Wind replaced prayer. Silence replaced ceremony. For centuries, the sanctuary rested almost forgotten beneath the open sky. Unlike many famous archaeological sites, Somatar never became a great tourist destination. It remained hidden in the countryside, visited by relatively few people. Perhaps that is one reason it survived so well. Today, researchers continue studying its inscriptions, tombs, and rock carvings. Every discovery reveals another small piece of a civilization that once looked toward the heavens for meaning. Many questions still remain. Why was this particular hill chosen? How were the ceremonies performed? What stories did the priests tell beneath the moonlit sky? The stones offer only fragments. The rest has been lost to time. Perhaps that is what makes Somatar so fascinating, not because it was the largest sanctuary or the richest, but because it reminds us that some of humanity's oldest places of worship were not built to dominate the landscape. They were built to become part of it. High above the plains of southeastern Turkey, the ancient sanctuary still watches the same moon its builders once honored nearly 2,000 years ago. And every night, that timeless connection continues. The granite sarcophagi of the Serapeum of Saqqara. Deep beneath the desert sands of Egypt, there is a tunnel unlike any other. It is silent, dark, and lined with enormous stone chambers. Inside each chamber sits a single black granite box, perfectly carved, perfectly polished. Each one weighs more than 70 tons. Even today, they leave visitors asking the same question. How did the ancient Egyptians move something so enormous into these underground tunnels? This mysterious place is known as the Serapeum of Saqqara, hidden beneath the vast necropolis of Saqqara, just south of the famous Step Pyramid. Unlike the royal tombs of pharaohs, the Serapeum was built for sacred animals, more specifically, for the Apis bull. To the ancient Egyptians, the Apis bull was no ordinary animal. It was believed to be the living manifestation of the god Ptah, one of Egypt's most powerful creator deities. Only one Apis bull could exist at a time. Priests searched carefully for a calf bearing a unique combination of sacred markings. Once chosen, the animal was treated like royalty. It lived inside magnificent temples, received the finest food, was attended by priests every day, and when it died, an elaborate funeral followed. That journey ended here, inside the Serapeum. The earliest parts of the underground complex were created during the reign of Amenhotep III, more than 3,300 years ago. Over the centuries, successive pharaohs expanded the tunnels. New burial chambers were carved deeper into the limestone bedrock, each one prepared to receive another sacred bull. Walking through the Serapeum today feels almost unreal. The corridors stretch into darkness. The air remains cool beneath the desert. Then, one of the chambers opens. At its center stands a massive granite sarcophagus, nearly 4 meters long, over 2 meters high. Its polished surfaces still reflect light after thousands of years. Most were carved from Aswan granite, quarried hundreds of kilometers to the south. Moving a single block from the quarry was already a remarkable achievement. But transporting it along the Nile, dragging it across the desert, then lowering it into underground chambers with astonishing precision, remains one of ancient Egypt's greatest engineering accomplishments. Even the lids are extraordinary. Some weigh nearly 30 tons by themselves. Yet they fit the stone boxes with remarkable accuracy. The craftsmanship is so refined that the polished surfaces still appear almost smooth enough to reflect a modern flashlight. For many visitors, the sarcophagi become the greatest mystery. Why make burial chambers so enormous for a single animal? Some have proposed unusual theories over the years, but archaeology offers a far simpler explanation. The Apis bull held immense religious importance. Every burial became a state ceremony. The enormous granite coffins reflected that sacred status. Just as kings received magnificent tombs, the sacred bulls received extraordinary burials. Excavations inside the Serapeum have uncovered inscriptions identifying many of the bulls buried here. Some chambers still preserve dedicatory texts left by priests and officials. These inscriptions allow archaeologists to trace centuries of Egyptian religious history. The Serapeum also attracted famous visitors. In the 5th century BC, the Greek historian Herodotus described the reverence shown toward the Apis bull. Centuries later, pilgrims continued traveling to Saqqara to honor these sacred animals. The underground sanctuary remained an important religious center long after many other traditions had begun to change. Then, time buried it. Sand gradually covered the entrances. Knowledge of the tunnels disappeared. For nearly 2,000 years, the Serapeum remained hidden beneath the desert, until 1851. French archaeologist Auguste Mariette arrived at Saqqara searching for ancient monuments. Following a pathway lined with broken sphinxes, he uncovered the entrance to the forgotten underground complex. As excavations continued, the massive granite sarcophagi emerged one after another. The discovery astonished the archaeological world. Today, many of the stone boxes remain exactly where they were placed thousands of years ago. Visitors still walk through the same corridors once used by ancient funeral processions. The silence feels almost unchanged. The polished granite still dominates every chamber. And the questions remain. How many workers carved these stones? How were they lowered into place? How many generations spent their lives expanding this remarkable underground sanctuary? Perhaps that is what makes the Serapeum of Saqqara so unforgettable. Not because it holds the tombs of famous pharaohs, or because it hides unimaginable treasure, but because beneath the Egyptian desert, an entire underground world was built to honor a single sacred animal. A place where faith inspired engineering on an astonishing scale, and where some of the largest stone coffins ever created continue to guard their secrets beneath the sands of Saqqara. The giant storage jars of Knossos. Long before ancient Greece reached its golden age, a powerful civilization flourished on the island of Crete. Its palaces were unlike anything the Mediterranean had seen. Brightly painted walls, Grand staircases, busy courtyards, and hundreds of rooms connected by winding corridors. At the heart of this civilization stood Knossos, the largest palace of the Minoans. For more than a century, archaeologists have explored its remarkable ruins. Many expected to find royal chambers, ceremonial halls, and magnificent works of art. Instead, some of the most important discoveries were hidden deep inside the palace. Long rows of narrow rooms, filled with enormous clay jars. These rooms are known as the magazines. They served as the palace's great storehouses. Walking through them today, the scale is difficult to imagine. Dozens of giant storage jars, called pithoi, once stood side by side. Some were taller than an adult. Many could hold hundreds of liters of grain, olive oil, wine, or dried food. Together, they stored enough supplies to feed an entire community. The jars themselves were masterpieces, each one shaped by hand from clay. Their thick walls were decorated with rope-like patterns pressed into the surface before firing. Some weighed hundreds of kilograms even when empty. Once filled, moving them would have been almost impossible. Instead, they remained exactly where they were placed. The palace was more than a royal residence. It was the economic heart of the kingdom. Farmers arrived from surrounding villages carrying harvests from across the island. Grain, olive oil, wine, honey, dried figs. Everything passed through the magazines before being distributed again. In many ways, the palace functioned like a giant warehouse. Officials carefully recorded what entered and what left. Small clay tablets covered with one of Europe's earliest writing systems, known as Linear A, have been discovered throughout Knossos. Although the script has never been fully deciphered, most archaeologists believe many of these records tracked goods stored inside the palace. Every jar mattered. Every harvest was counted. Excavations have also uncovered stone channels built into the floors. Researchers believe they helped collect spilled grain or liquids, keeping the storage rooms clean and reducing waste. Even the layout of the magazines reflects careful planning. Long, narrow corridors allowed workers to move efficiently between rows of storage jars. Nothing appears accidental. Everything served a purpose. Imagine entering these storerooms more than 3,500 years ago. Oil lamps flicker against the walls. Workers carry baskets of freshly harvested grain. Others seal large jars with clay lids before marking them for storage. Nearby, scribes record every delivery onto damp clay tablets. The palace is constantly moving, constantly organizing, constantly preparing for the future. The enormous quantity of stored food also tells us something important. Knossos controlled far more than its own needs. The palace collected resources from surrounding communities and redistributed them across the island. This system helped support craftsmen, priests, sailors, and administrators who no longer needed to grow their own food. It was one of the foundations of a complex civilization. For centuries, the magazines remained full. Then, disaster struck. Around 1450 BC, much of Knossos suffered severe destruction. Whether caused by earthquakes, fire, invasion, or a combination of events remains uncertain. Many of the great storage jars collapsed where they stood. Walls fell. Wooden roofs burned away. The palace slowly fell into ruin. Yet beneath the fallen stone, the magazines survived. Many of the giant pithoi remained exactly where workers had left them thousands of years earlier, waiting to be uncovered again. Today, visitors can still walk through these ancient storerooms. Rows of towering clay jars continue to line the narrow passages. They stand as silent reminders of one of Europe's earliest palace economies. Perhaps that is what makes Knossos so remarkable, not simply because of its legendary kings, or the myths of the Minotaur, but because hidden beneath its grand halls were ordinary storerooms that kept an entire civilization alive. Long before modern warehouses, long before banks and governments, the wealth of a kingdom rested inside rows of giant clay jars. And within those quiet magazines, the heartbeat of Minoan Crete can still be seen today. The forgotten hilltop city of La Quemada. High above the dry valleys of northern Mexico, stone walls rise from the top of a rugged hill. Broken stairways climb toward ancient terraces. Massive columns still stand where great buildings once overlooked the landscape. At first glance, it almost resembles a fortress, a city built to watch the horizon. Today, this remarkable place is known as La Quemada, one of the most mysterious archaeological sites in North America. For centuries, its empty ruins have puzzled explorers. Who built this city? Why was it constructed on such a steep hill? And why was it eventually abandoned? Even today, many of those questions remain unanswered. La Quemada flourished between AD 600 and 900, at a time when trade routes connected the civilizations of central Mexico with communities farther to the north. Its location was no accident. From the hilltop, people could see for kilometers across the surrounding valleys. Anyone approaching the settlement would have been visible long before reaching its walls. The city itself was unlike most others of its time. Instead of spreading across flat ground, its builders shaped the hillside into a series of massive stone terraces. Wide staircases connected different levels. Platforms supported homes, ceremonial buildings, and public gathering spaces. Every part of the city followed the natural slope of the mountain. One of the most impressive structures is the Hall of Columns. Even in ruin, its scale is remarkable. Rows of tall stone columns once supported a large roof, creating one of the site's most important public spaces. Archaeologists believe this may have been used for ceremonies, meetings, or important community gatherings. Nearby, large plazas opened between the buildings. Stone roads connected different parts of the settlement. Nothing about La Quemada appears random. It was carefully planned. The city's defensive walls are equally impressive. Some stretch for hundreds of meters across the hillside. In several places, the walls follow the edge of steep cliffs, creating powerful natural defenses. Whether they were built to keep enemies out or simply to define sacred spaces is still debated. Excavations have uncovered pottery, stone tools, ornaments, and the remains of homes where families once lived. Daily life continued much like any thriving settlement. Children played in the courtyards. Craftsmen shaped tools from stone. Farmers cultivated maize, beans, and squash in the nearby valleys. Trade also played an important role. Turquoise, obsidian, shell ornaments, and other valuable goods arrived from distant regions. La Quemada stood along important exchange routes linking different cultures across ancient Mexico. Ideas traveled here. People did too. One of the site's greatest mysteries lies in its purpose. Some archaeologists believe it served as a regional capital, controlling trade across northern Mexico. Others suggest it functioned mainly as a ceremonial center where surrounding communities gathered during important festivals. A few even argue it may have been both. A place of government, religion, and commerce all at once. Then, around AD 900, everything changed. Construction stopped. Homes were abandoned. The plazas fell silent. At some point, parts of the city were destroyed by fire. Blackened stones found across the site gave rise to its modern name, La Quemada, the burned place. Whether the fires were caused by war, internal conflict, or accidental destruction, no one knows for certain. After the city was abandoned, nature slowly reclaimed the hill. Roofs collapsed. Wooden beams disappeared. Only the stone walls remained. For centuries, travelers passed the ruins without knowing who had built them. Stories and legends grew around the abandoned city. Some believed it was connected to the legendary homeland of the Aztecs. Others imagined it had been a great fortress guarding the northern frontier. Modern archaeology has revealed part of the truth, but many questions still remain. Today, visitors climb the same stone stairways that people used more than 1,000 years ago. From the highest terrace, the view stretches across the valleys in every direction. The silence is almost complete. Only the wind moves through the ancient walls. Perhaps that is what makes La Quemada so fascinating. Not because it was the largest city, or the richest, but because it reminds us how much of North America's ancient past is still waiting to be understood. High above the valleys of Zacatecas, a forgotten city continues to guard its secrets, just as it has for more than 1,000 years. The ritual cave of Naya, deep within the rainforests of northern Borneo, a vast cave opens beneath towering limestone cliffs. Its entrance is enormous, large enough to swallow a cathedral. Sunlight reaches only the first few meters. Beyond that, darkness takes over. This is Nia Cave, one of Southeast Asia's most extraordinary archaeological sites. For thousands of years, people return to this place. Not for days, not for generations, but for Asia. Life inside the cave was never easy. The air was warm and humid. Smoke from cooking fires drifted toward the ceiling. Outside, the rainforest provided fruits, fish, wild pigs, monkeys, and countless edible plants. Everything people needed could be found nearby. Excavations have uncovered thousands of stone tools, animal bones, shell ornaments, charcoal from ancient hearths. Each layer of soil tells the story of another generation, another family, another chapter in the cave's long history. Then, archaeologists made an astonishing discovery. Deep inside the cave lay one of Southeast Asia's oldest human burials. The skeleton became known as the Deep Skull. Dating back roughly 40,000 years, it transformed what historians knew about the first people to settle this part of the world. It proved that humans had reached these distant forests far earlier than many researchers once believed. But Naya was more than a place to live. Over time, it also became a place of ritual. Throughout the cave, archaeologists uncovered carefully prepared burials dating from much later periods. Some individuals were placed inside beautifully carved wooden coffins. Others rested within boat-shaped burial containers suspended above the cave floor. These were not ordinary burials. They reflected traditions passed down through generations. To the people who lived here, the cave had become sacred. Exactly why remains uncertain. Perhaps the immense chambers inspired reverence. Perhaps generations believed their ancestors remained here. Or perhaps the cave was seen as a place where the world of the living met the world beyond. The answers disappeared long ago. Only the evidence remains. Naya Cave also reveals how human life changed over thousands of years. Early communities survived by hunting and gathering. Later generations introduced pottery. Polished stone tools appeared. Eventually, trade reached even these remote forests. Ideas continued to spread while the cave remained an important gathering place. One remarkable tradition still continues today. High above the cave floor, wooden platforms cling to the towering walls. Local communities climb these structures to collect edible bird nests, prized for centuries across Asia. It is a dangerous task, one that connects the present with practices that may stretch back hundreds of years. Standing inside Naya Cave today, the scale is almost impossible to describe. The ceiling disappears into darkness. The chambers seem endless. Every step crosses ground where thousands of generations once walked. Few archaeological sites preserve such an unbroken record of human life. Hunter-gatherers, early farmers, ancient traders, all passed through the same entrance. All left something behind. Perhaps that is what makes Naya Cave so remarkable. Not because it contains hidden treasure or magnificent temples, but because it preserves one of humanity's longest continuous stories. For nearly 40,000 years, people returned to this enormous cave to live, to bury their dead, to perform rituals, and to leave behind quiet traces of lives that still echo beneath the limestone cliffs of Borneo today. The goddess temple of New Heliang, hidden among the hills of northeastern China, far from the great cities of ancient history, lies a place that few people have ever heard of. There are no towering palaces, no written records, no kings carved into stone. Yet this forgotten landscape may preserve one of the earliest ceremonial centers ever built in East Asia. Today, it is known as New Heliang. For thousands of years, the site remained hidden beneath the earth. Only scattered stones hinted that something ancient rested below. Then archaeologists began excavating. What they uncovered changed the story of prehistoric China. New Heliang was built around 5,000 years ago, during the time of the Hongshan culture. This was long before China's first dynasties, long before the Great Wall, even before bronze was introduced to the region. Yet the people who lived here were already creating remarkable monuments. Across the hills, archaeologists uncovered large stone platforms, ceremonial altars, burial mounds, and carefully planned structures spread across several kilometers. This wasn't a simple village. It was a sacred landscape. One discovery attracted immediate attention. Buried beneath a mound, archaeologists found the remains of what became known as the Goddess Temple. Inside were fragments of large clay statues unlike anything previously discovered from this period. Among them was a life-sized female face with carefully shaped features and eyes made from polished jade. Although only fragments survived, the sculpture suggested that enormous statues once stood inside the temple. Who this woman represented remains unknown. Some believe she was a powerful goddess. Others think she may have represented an important ancestor or spiritual figure. Without written records, the answer remains a mystery. New Heliang is also famous for its extraordinary jade. Excavations uncovered beautifully carved ornaments, rings, and strange dragon-shaped objects now known as Hongshan jade dragons. Creating these pieces required incredible patience. Jade is one of the hardest natural stones to shape. Every object took countless hours of careful polishing. These were not ordinary decorations. They were symbols of status, power, and belief. Many were buried alongside important individuals beneath large stone cairns. The burial mounds themselves were carefully planned. Some stand on hilltops overlooking the surrounding valleys. Others align with nearby ceremonial platforms. The entire landscape appears to have been designed with purpose. Nothing feels accidental. Researchers believe people may have traveled long distances to gather here for ceremonies, rituals, and important events. New Heliang may have served as a spiritual center for communities spread across northeastern China. Imagine arriving here 5,000 years ago. Stone pathways lead toward the ceremonial grounds. Smoke rises from ritual fires. Priests prepare offerings beside the altars. Families climb the hills carrying precious jade objects to honor their ancestors. The hills are alive with ceremony. Not because of a king, but because of shared belief. The site also challenges older ideas about early societies. For many years, archaeologists believed large ceremonial centers only appeared after powerful kingdoms emerged. New Heliang tells a different story. Here, communities were already organizing massive construction projects long before the rise of China's earliest dynasties. Religion, art, and social organization were developing centuries earlier than once believed. Then, the ceremony stopped. The temples were abandoned. The burial grounds fell silent. Wind and rain slowly covered the monuments beneath layers of earth. For thousands of years, no one remembered the people who built them. Only the hills remained. Today, archaeologists continue uncovering new parts of the site. Every excavation reveals another platform, another burial, another beautifully carved piece of jade. Each discovery brings us a little closer to understanding one of East Asia's earliest ceremonial landscapes. Perhaps that is what makes New Heliang so remarkable, not because it belonged to an empire, or because it was ruled by famous kings, but because it reminds us that long before written history, people were already gathering to build sacred places, honor their ancestors, and create works of art that still inspire wonder 5,000 years later. Among the quiet hills of northeastern China, the forgotten temples of New Heliang continue to guard the earliest chapters of a civilization that was only just beginning. The sacrificial pits of Sangsingdui. In the fertile plains of southwestern China, a forgotten civilization lay buried beneath the earth. For thousands of years, no one knew it existed. There were no written records describing its rulers, no ancient maps marking its cities. Only quiet farmland stretched across the landscape. Then, everything changed. In 1986, archaeologists uncovered two enormous sacrificial pits unlike anything ever found in China. The discovery shocked the archaeological world. Today, the site is known as Sangsingdui, and it continues to rewrite the story of ancient China. The civilization flourished more than 3,000 years ago, around the same time the Shang dynasty ruled northern China. Yet Sangsingdui looked completely different. Its art, its beliefs. Even its bronze craftsmanship followed its own unique tradition. Nothing quite matched it. Inside the sacrificial pits, archaeologists uncovered thousands of extraordinary objects. Bronze masks, ivory tusks, gold ornaments, jade artifacts, and towering bronze statues unlike anything ever created before. Some of the bronze masks are impossible to forget. They have enormous almond-shaped eyes, sharp noses, large ears, and strangely exaggerated faces. Some are wider than a person. Others have eyes that project several centimeters from the face. No one knows exactly who they represent. Perhaps ancient rulers, perhaps powerful spirits, or perhaps gods worshipped by the people of Sangsingdui. The answers remain uncertain. One discovery stood above all the others. A magnificent bronze standing figure, more than 2.6 meters tall. It is one of the largest ancient bronze statues ever discovered anywhere in the world. The figure stands upright with both hands extended forward, as though once holding an object that has long since disappeared. Its clothing is covered with intricate patterns. Its expression remains calm. Even after 3,000 years, it still commands attention. Creating sculptures of this size required extraordinary skill. Bronze was melted at extremely high temperatures before being poured into carefully prepared molds. Every detail had to be planned in advance. A single mistake could ruin months of work. Yet the craftsmen of Sangsingdui mastered techniques that rivaled the finest metalworkers of the ancient world. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not what was found, but why it was buried. Many of the objects had been deliberately broken before being placed inside the pits. Some showed signs of burning. Others had been carefully arranged beneath layers of ash and soil. These were not ordinary rubbish pits. They were ceremonial deposits. Powerful objects intentionally offered during sacred rituals. Exactly why remains unknown. Some archaeologists believe the ceremonies honored powerful gods or royal ancestors. Others suggest they marked the end of an important dynasty or political change. Without written records, only the artifacts speak. Excavations have also uncovered the remains of an enormous ancient city surrounding the pits. Massive defensive walls once enclosed the settlement. Rivers flowed through carefully planned canals. Workshops produced bronze, jade, and gold on an astonishing scale. Sangsingdui was not an isolated village. It was a thriving urban center, one of the most advanced societies in ancient East Asia. Then, around 3,000 years ago, the city was abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Some researchers believe a massive earthquake changed the course of nearby rivers, leaving the settlement without enough water. Others point to flooding, environmental change, or political upheaval. Whatever happened, the city fell silent. Its temples disappeared beneath the earth. Its ceremonies ended. And for nearly 3 millennia, its existence was forgotten. Then archaeologists uncovered the sacrificial pits. In recent years, even more astonishing discoveries have emerged. Additional pits have revealed hundreds of new artifacts, including beautifully crafted gold masks, bronze trees, ceremonial vessels, and delicate silk fragments preserved beneath the soil. Each excavation adds another chapter to the story, and each discovery raises even more questions. Perhaps that is what makes Sangsingdui so remarkable. Not because of its incredible bronze masks, or its towering statues, but because it reminds us that history is far larger than the civilizations we already know. While famous kingdoms rose elsewhere, another extraordinary culture was quietly flourishing in southwestern China. Its people built, created, worshipped, and left behind masterpieces unlike any the ancient world had ever seen, only to vanish, leaving their greatest treasures buried beneath the earth, waiting patiently to be discovered thousands of years later. The skeleton lake of Rupkund, high in the Indian Himalayas, more than 5,000 meters above sea level, lies a small glacial lake surrounded by snow-covered peaks. For most of the year, it remains frozen beneath thick ice, silent, remote, almost impossible to reach. But when the snow begins to melt, the lake reveals a haunting secret: human bones, hundreds of them, scattered along the shoreline, some still resting beneath the clear mountain water, others emerging from the melting ice. Today, this mysterious place is known as Rupkund Lake, or, more famously, Skeleton Lake. The discovery first drew widespread attention during the early 20th century. At first, many believed the remains belonged to soldiers who had perished in battle. Others imagined they were victims of a forgotten war. But as archaeologists began studying the site, a far more complex story emerged. The skeletons did not belong to a single group, nor did they all die at the same time. Scientific studies revealed that many individuals lived more than 1,000 years ago, while others arrived centuries later. Rupkund had witnessed multiple journeys across the mountains, but one event stood out above the rest. Most of the ancient skeletons appear to date to around the 9th century AD. Who these people were remains uncertain. Some researchers believe they were pilgrims traveling toward a sacred Himalayan shrine. Others suggest they may have been merchants or local travelers crossing the high mountain passes. Whatever their destination, they never reached it. Many of the skeletons show a strange pattern of injuries. The damage appears almost entirely on the tops of the skulls and shoulders. There are few signs of wounds elsewhere on the body. This unusual evidence led researchers to a remarkable conclusion. The travelers may have been caught in an intense hailstorm. Not ordinary hail, but massive ice stones falling from the sky. At this altitude, there was nowhere to hide. No trees, no villages, no shelter. Only open mountains. Imagine the scene. A group slowly climbs the narrow trail. The air grows thinner with every step. Dark clouds gather above the peaks. Then, without warning, the storm arrives. Enormous hailstones crash onto the mountainside. People try to protect themselves, but the frozen rocks continue falling, one after another. In just a few moments, the journey comes to an end. The freezing temperatures preserved the remains for centuries. Ice covered the lake, snow buried the shoreline, and the mountains quietly guarded their secret. Modern archaeology has revealed even more surprises. DNA analysis showed that not everyone buried at Rupkund shared the same ancestry. Some came from the Indian subcontinent. Others had genetic origins linked to distant parts of the Mediterranean. How and why such different groups reached this isolated Himalayan lake remains one of the site's greatest mysteries. The answers are still being debated. Rupkund reminds us that ancient travel was often far more extensive than we imagine. Even the highest mountains did not stop people from crossing incredible distances. Today, the lake remains one of the world's most unusual archaeological sites. The skeletons have largely been removed for research and preservation, but the mystery remains. Every expedition uncovers new clues. Every scientific study adds another piece to the puzzle. Yet many questions still have no answers. Perhaps that is what makes Rupkund Lake so unforgettable, not because of the hundreds of skeletons resting beside its icy waters, but because it captures a single tragic moment, frozen in time. A journey across the Himalayas, interrupted by the power of nature, and preserved for more than 1,000 years beneath the snow, waiting for the mountains to reveal its story once again. The hidden treasure of Nahal Mishmar. In the barren cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, a narrow cave sits high above the desert floor. It is difficult to reach, easy to overlook, and for thousands of years, it remained completely untouched. Nothing about the cave suggested it held one of the greatest archaeological discoveries ever made in the ancient Near East. Today, it is known as the Cave of the Treasure. The discovery came in 1961 during an archaeological expedition exploring the Judean desert. As researchers searched the cave, they uncovered a tightly wrapped bundle hidden deep inside. It had been carefully placed beneath layers of rock, almost as if someone wanted to make sure it would never be found. When the bundle was opened, the archaeologists could hardly believe what they were seeing. Inside were more than 400 extraordinary objects: copper scepters, crowns, maces, ceremonial staffs, beautifully crafted tools, and objects unlike anything ever discovered before. Together, they became known as the Nahal Mishmar Hoard. The treasure dates back nearly 6,000 years to the Chalcolithic period, when people were just beginning to experiment with working copper. At that time, metal was still incredibly rare. Most everyday tools were made from stone, yet the craftsmen who created these objects displayed astonishing skill. Many pieces were cast using the lost wax method, a remarkably advanced technique that allowed molten metal to be poured into detailed molds. Even today, it remains one of the most sophisticated methods of metalworking. The decorations are equally impressive. Some objects are covered with carved animals. Others display birds, ibex, horns, and strange geometric patterns. Several designs have never been fully explained. They seem to belong to a symbolic world that has almost completely disappeared. One object immediately captured archaeologists' attention: a beautifully decorated copper crown. Unlike the golden crowns of later kings, this one appears to have been used during religious ceremonies. Its unusual shape and elaborate design suggest it belonged to someone of great importance. Perhaps a priest, perhaps a ritual leader. No one knows for certain. The greatest mystery, however, is not how the objects were made, but why they were hidden. None of the artifacts appear to have been buried as grave goods. There were no human remains nearby. Instead, someone deliberately gathered these priceless ceremonial objects, wrapped them with great care, and concealed them inside the cave. Then, they never returned. Some archaeologists believe the treasure was hidden during a time of conflict. Perhaps priests removed sacred objects from a nearby temple before an enemy arrived. Others suggest the people who hid them intended to recover them later. If that was the plan, something prevented them from coming back. The cave remained sealed for thousands of years. The dry desert climate preserved the copper with remarkable success. Unlike many ancient treasures that were melted down or stolen, the Nahal Mishmar hoard survived almost exactly as it had been left. Excavations across the region have linked many of the objects to the nearby Chalcolithic sanctuary at Ein Gadi. Although the connection cannot be proven completely, many researchers believe the artifacts once belonged to an important religious center overlooking the Dead Sea. If true, the hoard may represent the ceremonial treasures of one of the world's earliest temples. Today, the objects continue to astonish archaeologists, not simply because of their age, but because they reveal a level of artistic and technical skill few expected from such an early society. Long before great kingdoms ruled the region, master craftsmen were already creating objects of incredible beauty. Perhaps that is what makes the Nahal Mishmar hoard so remarkable, not because it is made of copper, or because it remained hidden for 6,000 years, but because someone, facing an uncertain future, chose to protect these sacred objects rather than abandon them. They disappeared. Their names were forgotten, but the treasure they carefully concealed survived, waiting in the silence of a desert cave until the modern world finally uncovered it once again. The stone jars of the Plain of Jars. Across the rolling hills of northern Laos, thousands of enormous stone jars stand silently beneath the open sky. Some rise taller than a person. Others are half buried beneath centuries of grass and soil. A few remain perfectly intact. Many have cracked with age. But together, they create one of the strangest landscapes anywhere on Earth. There are no inscriptions explaining who built them. No nearby cities filled with ancient records. No surviving legends that fully explain their purpose. Only thousands of massive stone vessels, scattered across the countryside as though they have always belonged there. Today, this remarkable landscape is known as the Plain of Jars. It remains one of Southeast Asia's greatest archaeological mysteries. The first explorers who reached these hills could hardly believe what they were seeing. Jar after jar stretched across the landscape. Some stood alone on isolated hilltops. Others formed enormous groups containing dozens or even hundreds of vessels. Everywhere they looked, more appeared. Today, archaeologists have identified more than 90 different jar sites containing over 2,000 surviving stone jars, and new sites continue to be discovered. Each jar was carved from a single block of stone. Most were shaped from sandstone. Others from granite, limestone, or conglomerate rock gathered from nearby quarries. Some weigh several tons. The largest exceed 10 tons. Even the smallest required an extraordinary amount of labor. Imagine the challenge. A massive block of stone is first cut from a mountainside. Stone hammers and iron tools slowly shape its rough surface. Workers spend weeks hollowing out the center. Every strike removes only a small piece. When the jar is finally finished, the hardest task still remains. It must somehow be transported across forests, rivers, and steep hills to its final destination. Exactly how this was done remains uncertain. Some researchers believe wooden sledges were pulled by large teams of workers. Others suggest rollers made from tree trunks helped move the heavy stones across the landscape. Without written records, no one can say for certain. But one thing is clear. Building the Plain of Jars required remarkable planning and cooperation. For many years, the purpose of the jars puzzled everyone. Early European explorers proposed extraordinary theories. Some believed they were giant containers used to store food. Others imagined they collected rainwater for travelers crossing the hills. Local legends offered an even more colorful explanation. According to one story, a race of giants once ruled these mountains. After winning a great battle, they carved the enormous jars to brew vast quantities of rice wine for a celebration unlike anything the world had ever seen. It is a fascinating tale, but archaeology points in another direction. During the 20th century, researchers began excavating around the jars themselves. What they found changed everything. Beneath the surrounding soil lay human burials, fragments of bone, ceramic vessels, glass beads, iron tools, bronze ornaments, and carefully prepared graves. Many burials were placed beside the jars rather than inside them. Some contained cremated remains. Others held complete skeletons. The evidence suggested the jars were closely connected to ancient funeral ceremonies. Exactly how they were used remains uncertain. One theory proposes that the dead were first placed inside the jars for a period of time. After the body naturally decomposed, the bones were carefully collected and buried nearby in a second ceremony. This practice, known as secondary burial, has been observed in several ancient cultures throughout Asia. Another theory suggests the jars stored offerings, ashes, or ceremonial objects used during funeral rituals. Neither explanation answers every question. The mystery remains. Yet almost every new excavation strengthens the connection between the jars and the ancient beliefs surrounding death. Archaeologists have also discovered beautifully carved stone discs scattered among the jar fields. Some feature circles carved into their surfaces. Others display human figures or simple geometric patterns. At first, researchers believed they were lids placed over the tops of the jars, but many were found lying beside nearby burials instead. Today, most archaeologists believe these discs probably served as grave markers rather than jar covers. Like the jars themselves, their true purpose remains uncertain. The people responsible for this remarkable landscape remain equally mysterious. Most researchers believe the jars were created between 500 BC and AD 500. During this period, northern Laos lay along important trade routes connecting southern China, mainland Southeast Asia, and the Mekong River basin. Communities exchanged goods, ideas, technologies, and religious traditions across these mountain corridors. The builders of the jars were clearly skilled stoneworkers, yet almost everything else about them has disappeared. No cities have been found nearby. No written language survives. No kings are remembered. Only the jars remain. Then, history brought another tragedy to the site. During the Vietnam War, large areas of Laos became some of the most heavily bombed landscapes in human history. Many of the jar fields suffered damage. Even today, unexploded bombs remain hidden beneath parts of the countryside, making archaeological work slow and dangerous. Before every excavation, specialist teams must carefully clear the ground. Only then can researchers begin uncovering the past. Despite these challenges, the Plain of Jars continues to reveal new discoveries. Every excavation uncovers more graves, more pottery, more ornaments, more clues about the people who built this extraordinary landscape. And every answer seems to create another question. Perhaps that is what makes the Plain of Jars so unforgettable. Not because the jars are the biggest ever carved, or because they are the oldest, but because they stand as silent witnesses to a civilization we still barely understand. A people capable of moving stones weighing many tons, creating one of the world's largest ritual landscapes, and then disappearing almost completely from history. Today, as the wind moves gently across the hills of Laos, the giant jars remain exactly where they have stood for more than 2,000 years, watching the seasons pass, watching civilizations rise and fall, still waiting for the day their greatest secret is finally understood.